if Epsilon does not exist, I do not know who has the solution for this. It's nice to work your butt off and then lay down on the pillow and think, okay, there are 500 patients that are hopefully have gotten better care thanks to the work of the 5 or 6 of us. I think Epsilon will start to be known for one of the most impactful AI companies out there. God forbid, but I want on my tombstone to say this guy solved the radiology shortage and did some other kind of impactful things with medical imaging.
On today's episode of the First 10 podcast, we have a founder who embodies the scrappy, visionary mindset that defines all successful entrepreneurs. Please welcome Rustin Rassoli, the founder of Epsilon Labs. Rustin's story starts much earlier than his current venture. As a high school entrepreneur, Rustin was already building and scaling, creating the iOS app Retail, which attracted nearly 5,000 users and sent 7,000 cards globally. He honed his unique expertise in team building and scaling during his time as a former founder in residence at Atomic VC, a venture studio focused on assembling dream teams. Now, he's taking on one of the most critical and collapsing systems in the US, Radiology. Founded in 2024, Epsilon Labs is combating the crisis of 700 million annual scans against a dwindling radiologist workforce, with a profound mission to ensure that no diagnosis is missed, delayed, or wrong. At Epsilon Labs, Rustin is building a team that blends technology and medicine. Epsilon already boasts talent from Google DeepMind, Twitch, and Coinbase, and backed by investors Uncork, Bedrock, and Jack Altman. To me, it looks like Rustin is building the future of human-AI collaboration, and I'm excited to explore all that this entails. Rustin Rassoli, welcome to the First 10 podcast.
Thanks for having me, Boris. Thanks for that introduction.
Of course. How do we do?
I think you did a good job. I'm sure there was some AI deep research there because you kind of went deep, but you did a pretty good job.
We found some stuff. We definitely found some stuff. Let's kick things off. Tell me about a recent book that you've read and how it impacted your life.
I have not been reading as much as I should be. I will admit. Most recent, it's been like since I started this company, I've not read a book, which
I can imagine tough to balance.
I don't know. I think I read 0 to 1 between the time when I left Atomic and started this company, and it's a good book to read before you get on a kind of go on a big adventure. It kind of the whole notion of competition is for losers. I think we've lost that certainly in 2025, right? Every company has 10 competitors, so it's a good reminder to read before starting a company.
Was that a big takeaway? The focus away from competition?
I mean, generally, I have started companies, or my ideas have been kind of out there where there isn't a ton of competition. I believe in execution risk, not kind of market risk. I think companies that have execution risk are much more fun to build.
Interesting. Okay, and we'll certainly get into that. But first, I found an old resume of yours. Since I'm a recruiter and snooper of sorts, where it says, and I quote, "You did a summer internship as a salon wholesaler." Sorry, what is a salon wholesaler?
That is my uncle's company.
Okay.
I was a kind of CS major at first, math major. I finished with a math major. I didn't do any of the typical kind of CS internships like my friends did, and so I would find interesting things to do over the summers. And one of them was interning at my uncle's company, and he sells a bunch of kind of shampoo lines, furniture for salons, all these type of things. So I helped a lot with their on their e-commerce stuff.
Yeah, I picked up on looking at your background and getting to know you. I picked up on a thread of entrepreneurship in the blood, so to say. Like, at what point did you know that was like your path? And to tell me a little bit about your entrepreneurial story.
Pretty early on, I think the first kind of endeavor that I started doing was drop shipping, but in a very kind of different sense. And I always tell my friends, if you need to make money, you should do this. Best Buy had this thing called Deal of the Day. I think I was 10 years old or something. And it's something called Deal of the Day where they would drop the pricing on a product by a substantial amount for 24 hours. So I would take that product, list it on eBay, undercut all the listings, and then kind of list it and hope it would sell and ship it directly straight to the buyer. And so I did that for a couple years when I was young, and I started making money. And then it was just like, okay, what's the next thing? What's the next thing? And here we are now.
Interesting. And any of those experiences, or how did those experiences shape your approach to founding and leading a company today?
I think I've had kind of, that wasn't that serious of an endeavor, but retail that you mentioned, at Atomic, I think each one you walk away with a kind of a major lesson or a big lesson as a result of your failure. I think with retail, it was really around, okay, here's an idea. How do I take it into a product? How do I get users? I think at Atomic, it was more like, okay, now I've raised a pre-seed round. I've essentially got in capital. What's the smartest way to deploy that? How do you kind of manage your investors? How do you position the company for this next kind of round of funding? How do you get your first couple kind of enterprise customers, business customers? Each one of those have kind of been lessons that snowball and accumulate. And I think right now that the lesson that I'm learning, not in the light of failure, hopefully, in the light of building a very successful company, is team building. And most of my time right now is spent around team building, and that's a post product market fit kind of endeavor, right? Once you figure that out, once you have more traction, more demand than supply, you really think about, okay, I have this capital in the bank. How do I deploy it correctly and recruit the right team? Because it really does come down to team. The saying of the team you build is the company you build is very, very true, especially post product market fit.
Yeah. Our first ten's ethos is there's nothing more important to the success of a
Yeah.
startup than the first 10 engineers you hire.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I 100% will agree with that. Is that something that they kind of that you saw firsthand at Atomic in the form of how they invest and develop companies?
I think the big lesson I learned at Atomic was because there's a core team that kind of remains, right? There's like 70 people, 75 people that kind of gets deployed across each portfolio company. Eventually the company goes out and spins out and hires its own team. I would spend a lot more on the earlier stage of like, okay, here's the idea. How do we get it off the ground? Um, that was kind of the core lesson I learned at Atomic of like, okay, here's the idea. What's the easiest and lowest hanging fruit product you can build to kind of test it, and then also how do you kind of test traction more so than just a wait list, right? How do you kind of make sure you're going to have paying customers? How do you get your first customers? How do you see if there's something here, not just you know a couple $1,000 in revenue, but okay, if we can get XYZ customer, there's probably a much larger market there. So most of my focus was at Atomic and learning. I like to say I got a PhD in 0 to 1. I got a PhD in, here's the idea, what's next, and doing that in different industries and different types of customers. That was very informative.
I can imagine. Yeah, I can imagine that being a dream experience.
It was, yeah, yeah,
Very tailored to your entrepreneurial
yeah,
upbringing, and then very conducive to what you're doing now, right?
yeah,
Founding
yeah, yeah.
founding your own startup.
Yeah, it is very weird how life works, and that was like the perfect job to get out of college.
Yeah, it ends up it usually works out pretty perfectly in
Yeah.
hindsight. Hard to
Yes.
always kind of like
Yes.
believe in everything as it's
Yeah.
happening, but in hindsight, it always worked out
Yeah.
perfectly. I'm a
Yeah.
big believer of that. You're curious. So, um, you landed at Atomic VC. Was it straight out of UT Austin, or was there somewhere in between? And I'm yeah, straight out of UT Austin.
Well, I graduated a semester early, and I did have a little bit of fun for a couple months. And I think between January and April, I was A, having fun, and B, looking for the perfect job. And in retrospect, that was a good decision because A, I didn't have a ton of fun in college, but B, it gave me breathing room to find the perfect job. So I actually declined a couple job offers because they didn't seem like the right role. It seemed like I had more potential, and so that kind of graduating early gave me the breathing room, gave me, there wasn't as much pressure to find, okay, what am I going to do post graduation?
So a lot of college grad. There's a lot of talk about how tough it is for college graduates to find a job right now. I mean, AI is taking jobs. Companies are going through layoffs or trimming. I know it's hard to kind of necessarily connect to all those things in AI startup mode because it's such a different world. But you know, how did you land that job at Atomic? Any advice that you would offer to someone graduating college right now looking for their first role? There's so many people that are struggling with that right now.
Well, I have a brother and sister actually who just graduated college, so I completely understand the struggle.
Yeah.
Um, Look, advice in retrospect is you've got to not think about money. I think that's the biggest mistake most college graduates make. They're so focused on how much I'm making. Uh, and that just never, ever, ever crossed my mind. Not even one bit. But my peers, that was a huge priority. So like that's number one. And look, that might be a luxury, right? There are different reasons why I didn't care about money. I kind of scratched that itch with a side business, and I realized, okay, this is, can kind of put that desire and dream aside. That probably would be the biggest advice. And in terms of how I got the job at Atomic and kind of working backwards, it was just cold outreach to very smart people that I knew, and on Twitter actually. So I would just DM people on Twitter. One of them was a partner at Atomic, and then the rest is history. So it's the kind of advice there is kind of think out of the box, and you need to go way beyond just applying on a job board. But it is tough. Like I am kind of glad I'm not graduating right now.
I love that you said that. That's near exactly what I'm preaching. I hear a lot of college graduates talk about applying and the dead end, black hole that enters them into. And I don't know who's still preaching that, who's still promoting that. I'm like, stop
Yeah.
doing that. I'm like, literally,
Yeah.
just literally make a list of the companies you want to work for and hit
Yes.
up their founders, their CEOs. Like,
Exactly.
they want to talk to you, especially if you can kind of come in a compelling way that resonate with their business
Yeah.
and what they're doing. Like,
Yeah.
you'll get an interview at least.
100% you'll get an interview. It's I think the coming generations we're losing that kind of out of the box thinking, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, you're a founder. You're probably not hiring someone fresh out of college, but I bet you if someone like compelling comes to you with like appreciation of your problem and some way they could contribute to your business, you'd want to talk to them.
I'll take the call any day. Yeah, of
I
course.
love that. I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Let's talk a little bit about Epsilon. I'm excited about what you're building, and I'll get into it for my own reasons. But I'm curious. Tell us a little bit about the impetus for starting Epsilon. What was your view of the world before you started it? Can you kind of recreate the moment where it kind of struck you that the world needs this?
It's a good question, obviously. I always, when I think about startup ideas, I always think of like, okay, what if I can achieve XYZ? How does it impact the world? How does it change the world? That's always been the biggest motivator in terms of what I work on. If you look back historically on the ideas I worked on, very different. Retail was greeting cards. I did a trucking company at Atomic. So kind of weird kind of things, but it was always, what if I can achieve XYZ? The story with Epsilon starts when I think I was in fourth grade. My dad bought an imaging center, an outpatient imaging center in North Houston. Not a doctor, does not have a medical background. Kind of just long story short, it was just a good business opportunity and kind of something very lucky that kind of came across his plate. And through that, when he bought it, I always was into computers. I built computers, so I was always helping him on his website and phones and IT and all this kind of pack server and all this kind of stuff. You spend a lot of time with him. You spend a lot of time in the office. You kind of observe how medical imaging and radiology works, and you see the good and the bad. And the bad that growing up always kind of it was always top of mind is the misdiagnosis rate in radiology is pretty frequent, more than people would think, and it has pretty drastic downstream effects on patients. And as I kind of got older, these stories would continue and increase, and you kind of ask yourself why and why is this normal? There's a pretty bad radiology shortage in the country. We've been talking about this for a while, but we're getting closer and closer to the point where someone has to do something about it because We have 19,000 radiologists. Half of them are at retirement age. Uh, and knowing all of this and seeing this firsthand, it was really hard not to start a company to try to solve this. Now that we do have technology that can significantly, help radiologists be more efficient and accurate. So, it was the kind of growing up around the space, and then the observing what's happening in the technology space, and kind of joining those two, and starting Epsilon.
Fascinating. And you did something that is at least fascinating to me. Most of the founders that I talk to, most of the startups that I work with, would be building, your version of like, they would have decided to build software for radiologists, right? Most of the startups that we work with are building software for the industry they're trying to solve. One of our startups is building, bookkeeping software. They're not building a bookkeeping service. They're building the software for bookkeepers. But you decided to build an AI-enabled radiology practice. You're building a radiology practice.
Correct. It's just crazy, right? You have to run a software company, you have to run a AI research group, and then you have to run a radiology practice. So in my inbox, any day it's like, oh, we should read this paper, and there's this patient that we need to address. Oh, can you read this case ASAP? It's a lot of context switching. I think in most industries, you can build software that's really effective and lucrative and can grow to have a lot of impact. I think within radiology, the what I've learned and what I've observed is, there's this obvious problem, but solving it as a software company, you run into some pretty big barriers. It's just, you hear this notion that healthcare is fragmented. It's very true in radiology, and there are regulatory challenges. There's data challenges, and so all these challenges kind of accumulate, and each one limits your ambition. Each one kind of narrows the scope of what you're capable of doing. And so, me being hyper ambitious, I always wanted to solve the shortage, right? If God forbid, but I want on my tombstone to say this guy solved the radiology shortage and did some other kind of impactful things with medical imaging. In order to do that, I kind of came to the conclusion that, okay, we need to build our own practice, and once the image gets sent over to us, once the image gets taken in the machine, we now are in full control in terms of what we do with the image, the kind of quality bar, kind of all these things we have control over. And ultimately, my thesis is that that's the only way to solve the shortage, right? Be the middleman between the radiologist and the imaging center, and just make sure every single kind of small, major and minor step has been perfected, so that you are delivering the best quality radiology services in the U.S. and then hopefully globally as well.
Interesting. I have a lot of questions. I want to unpack that. I saw a stat somewhere. Is it true that it takes 13 years to train a radiologist? Did I read that right somewhere? Does that sound accurate?
Yeah, I think so. Medical school, residency, fellowship. You're pretty much at the 13-year mark, uh, which most healthcare, and most professions within healthcare, is, I think, a pretty long time.
And tell me more about. So there's a radiologist shortage right now. So given how much time it takes and probably the retiring population, maybe shore up the, like, how big of a demand is there for radiology right now, and then how big is the gap between the current radiology decline?
Yeah. You will find many different stats out there. I think there's a stat there that says by 2030 we're going to need 30,000 radiologists. And right now we have 19,000 radiologists, with half of them at retirement age. So you have this kind of retiring and aging population of radiologists. You have medical students that are fearful of becoming radiologists because they think that they will be, they won't have a job by the time they're 50, which, is in 20, 30 years. I don't think anyone has an answer to this. I think it's all kind of guessing game. So I understand their hesitation. And so you have this kind of shrinking supply pool. On the demand side, what's very interesting is imaging is kind of surging and becoming more important. There's a stat out there that says 75% of patients touch imaging. I think what's interesting to think about is, okay, when a patient goes into the healthcare system, by default they get imaging done, and this is going to increase for a couple of reasons, and I think it's important to talk about. One is we have an aging kind of human population. Two is we have a lot of people using emergency services and urgent care. And when people do that, these hospital systems, they A, want to make more money, but B, they want to kind of reduce their liability so they get imaging done. Three is we have a lot of nurse practitioners and physician assistants, and they tend to also order a lot of imaging because they don't have the kind of medical background, and they kind of want to de-risk their own malpractice. And then lastly, we're coming up with a lot of treatments. When you come up with these treatments, you want to get medical imaging done to make sure that they're effective. So you have this kind of surge in demand, shrinking supply pool. And frankly, if Epsilon does not exist, I do not know who has the solution for this. So, I think what we're doing is incredibly important and is the only way to truly solve the radiology shortage.
Yeah, it sounds scary to think about that. I was not aware of that and how critical imaging is, and how many patients it touches. That's a wild number.
Yeah, yeah.
So, and so what you're building. You talked about. I want to bring back what you said earlier. You talked about building three companies in one. So an AI company, a software company, and a medical company, and a radiology clinic, all in one. So what are the pieces of Epsilon, and maybe how do they all kind of work together from the lens of, okay, you get a request to review an image or review an X-ray.
Yeah. So three pieces. The easiest one to kind of talk about is the medical practice, right? So there's Epsilon Health Physician Association, where we have radiologists who are signing off on medical imaging reports. And those reports, we're getting the image, we're producing a report, and that report is going straight back to the referring physician and to the patient. And so, there's radiologists involved, there's medical malpractice involved. There's a whole kind of medical practice that operates, of course, remotely, right? Where our radiologists sit at home, but there's an entire radiology practice that operates, and we're seeing about 500 patients a day as of this recording, and hopefully, in the coming months, we can, as ambitious as it sounds, 5x to 10x that. That's kind of what we're running towards. Then we have kind of the research group, which is where we're kind of coming up with. We have this kind of massive data set that we've trained our models on, that we're coming up with improvements on the model based on feedback from the radiologists. So there's this kind of very tight relationship between our engineers and researchers and the radiologists, and we're kind of looking at kind of key metrics and saying, okay, if we improve XYZ, how does it affect the performance of the radiologist? And then lastly, there's a lot of software to build that can kind of support the operations of the practice, both for making kind of delivering care better for the patients and also making the life of our radiologists more efficient and just overall improved. So if we do all these three things very well, I believe we will build the largest practice in the country and hopefully globally. But it's definitely a lot of work to do.
Yeah, I'm imagining almost like robotaxi or like autonomous driving, but for radiology. It's kind of what I'm imagining, right?
Yeah. Definitely different elements that it's, you just think, oh yeah, it's a self-driving car. Well, there's the charging, there's the cleaning, there's the app for the customer. It's to move the world forward. I think we've reached a point where you can't just create creating a software company and having a ton of impact is hard.
Yeah, I 100% agree, and I'm certainly rooting for you. And I'm excited about the way you've set up what you're building and the opportunity. So let's talk a little bit about the team. So you've been successful in attracting a killer team. You have engineers from DeepMind, Twitch, Coinbase, and some incredible companies. What's the value proposition? What do you what are you telling these engineers, and what are these engineers excited about building at Epsilon?
I think it's multifaceted. One is we're a small team, and we're pretty close, and there's kind of no layers of management or anything like that. Pretty much everyone's an IC, and you're what you are doing on a day-to-day basis has a very clear impact on patients and radiologists, and you get to see that kind of on a daily basis. I think generally, kind of speaking on a more higher level, we are a healthcare company, and so healthcare technology companies do tend to have a lot of impact. And I think a lot of engineers and researchers want to know that their work is touching someone somehow on a kind of daily basis. And so the ability to create software that again, right now, 500 patients, it affects the lives of 500 patients. I think, it's nice to work your butt off and then, lay down on the pillow and think, okay, there are 500 patients that are hopefully have gotten better care thanks to the work of the, five or six of us. And that will continue to increase. And so ultimately it ties into impact, right? We have impact today. And then I think our ambitions are pretty vast in terms of the impact we'll have in the future, hopefully. And then it's, again, the approach is very different than has been tried historically. Again, not just a software company, it's a practice. There's a lot of moving pieces and a lot of opportunity for impact.
Yeah, that has to be huge. Again, I keep coming back to the attractiveness of building inside of a real life practice. You're not building software that
Yeah.
a practice then uses, and there's like a gap between the impact loop, right? Like first, like who will even use my software, and even if they are using it, like to
Yeah.
what extent am I connecting to some bottom line impact? But in
Yeah.
this case, you're building the software within
Yeah.
the same company that's creating the impact, which is
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah. We have our radiologists on Slack, and we get messages, and sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad. But for sure the feedback cycle is within hours instead of weeks or months.
Tell me a little bit about that. So these are three distinct cultures, right? AI, software, and radiology. Like, what is the team culture like? How do you all work together? I mean, it must be fun to watch radiologists
It's fun.
interact with AI engineers.
It's fun for sure. I think getting them to speak each other's language is sometimes difficult.
Yeah.
We often get feedback. Just make the model better. And obviously, every time you get feedback on model improvement, your brain, the feedback kind of gets split into different parts of your brain. Okay, there's this that we can do, there's that we can do, and it's to some extent it's a guessing game. But the good news is that we can guess and we can be right or wrong very quickly, right? We can get feedback, we can make a guess, and then deploy that kind of iteration, and very within minutes even or hours we kind of get we kind of see the improvement. In terms of culture, again, we're pretty, we have a stand up every morning, and we're looking at our linear tickets, and we're looking at our kind of dashboard of analytics, and so we're balancing, okay, what are the highest priority tasks to do to kind of improve. We have 2-3 metrics that are hypercritical to our business, which I appreciate. It's very clear that these 1 or 2 metrics, if we improve those, the business kind of the growth engine goes much faster. And so it's just constant obsession on, okay, look at the metrics. What are the highest priority tasks to do, and who is best positioned to do it and do it quickly.
What's a preconceived notion that radiologists have of the AI that's being built, and what's a preconceived notion that AI engineers have of the radiologists who they interact with? Because those are such different worlds. I mean, they don't get the benefit of just kind of hanging out like they do at Epsilon.
It's a good question. I think engineers don't fully appreciate how nuanced radiology is, and the fact that it's not binary. And a radiologist A can be very kind of differently opinionated on something than radiologist B. And that obviously comes with its challenges, but also kind of creates opportunities for us. But it's not like, hey, I can kind of code this. It's things are not binary in radiology, which I think now obviously everyone on the Epsilon engineering team kind of fully understands and appreciates. But initially you think to yourself, oh, this is a pretty easy problem to solve. There's not a lot of technical challenge here. It's just is this present or not, and that's it. But it turns out to be a lot more difficult than that. Um, from the radiologist perspective, I think they think we can tell the model to do things. I think they think we can talk to the model, but we can't. I wish we could. I think they think we can just ask it to be more descriptive or ask it to, comment on certain things, but we can't. That's kind of a learning curve in terms of how the radiologists learn to work with us. Obviously, we'd love to kind of take their comments and just prompt engineer things, but it's far more challenging than that.
I love it. You're building important bridges there.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, I essentially have to be the translator between radiologist and engineer and radiologist, which initially was a challenge, but now it's much more easy to deal with.
Well, it's cool that you're building it as one culture. I've seen companies that have like distinct workforces, so to say, and they build them separately and they kind of treat them separately on purpose, so as not to kind of like intermix. But I love that it's kind of like one team, one effort,
Yeah,
one output, right?
yeah,
Impacting the patient, like that's huge.
yeah, yeah. Our chief medical officer is on every single stand up we do. So it's me, our chief medical officer, and all the engineers. We'll see how long we can sustain this, but yeah, I hope we can kind of keep the team keep the team very closely working together.
So one thing I'm curious about, you've talked throughout this is building your own models, and so maybe talk a little bit about what you see as existing out there in the world of existing models, like open source or available capabilities through the major labs, as compared to what either you're building and as compared to what's needed in to solve the radiology problem that you're addressing, and like why you chose to build the way you're building.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, there's a lot of research, or there are a lot of kind of studies that have shown that the big models do not perform very well in radiology and medical imaging. And I think it's just not a focus of theirs. And the thing that people don't appreciate is LLMs are a lot simpler than when you introduce vision, you're trying to get the computer to see, and the computer doesn't see like a human, and it obviously doesn't think like a human, and that introduces orders of magnitude more challenges when it comes to kind of accuracy and performance of the model. And so I think that's kind of like one of the core reasons as to why the large models don't do so well with medical imaging. Another reason is a lot of your training data is mislabeled, right? There is a radiology shortage that shows up in your training data, right? Not everything is labeled correctly. Not everything is kind of detailed. It's not as easy as saying this is a cat, that's a dog. And so training data is so critical, and getting good training data is very hard. And then lastly, a model that's trained on hospital A will not do well on a model that's trained on or that's deployed in hospital B, right? There's different patients, different demographics, different machines. All of these kind of to you and I might not look so different, but to a computer look very, very different. And so kind of solving for that is it's a key challenge you must solve for. And so that's kind of the core reasons why I think that the large labs haven't kind of made more progress in this field. And then when it comes to open source, all the open source models at the time of this recording, they're all just chest, and they're not that great. And so we kind of had to build our own models. There wasn't really a choice. Our business model has allowed us to collect a ton of training data, and so as far as I know, we have more training data than any other company working in the space from many different sources. And that was again enabled just because of our business model.
Incredible. I mean, I again love the recognition of what exists, what is needed, and then the ambition, because it's no easy task. One, to decide, and then two, to build a proprietary model to do this. Right? It's huge.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Especially as a seed stage company, you've got to be smart and efficient.
I get it. So I'm starting to kind of tease out what is so attractive to engineers from some of these top places. Like it's a massive problem and a technologically compelling approach towards doing it.
Yeah, yeah, and again, very fast feedback cycle.
Love it. So it sounds like you're growing. Tell me a little bit about your team right now and who you're looking for.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So we have a pretty small dedicated team of 6 people, split between the kind of engineering and then the research kind of AI/ML team. We are trying to expand both. We need on the engineering team. There is a backlog of customers that we have, and kind of each one has somewhat of a custom implementation. And that's kind of A. And then B, there's a lot of work for the engineering team to help on the ML team on the infrastructure side to be able to move more quickly and to kind of to build the infrastructure to train models more quickly, both based on our training data and then the production data that we get every single day. So there's the challenge of massive amounts of data and how do you kind of correctly organize it and making it useful to the ML team. Then on the ML team, there's just there's such a massive search space when you're training your own models and when you're training your own vision language models, right? You have different kind of vision models, different language models, different ways to put them together, and then all the kind of post-training techniques that you can do. And then again, there's this massive 9 million study data set that we use to pre-train our models. And then we have these production cases that come in from our radiologists every single day where we know the bar of our radiologists is very high, the quality of our training data is very high. How do we use reinforcement learning to make sure that the model is kind of writing the reports in a very detailed fashion so that the referring physician and the patients are getting the best care possible? That's a big problem that you see in the space. It's the open source models, the kind of GPT models. Uh, you need to have a very high bar in terms of quality, and not only quality when it comes to correctness, but quality when it comes to thoroughness, right? Because if you make these reports more thorough, it gives the referring physician more information to on how to treat the patient, whether it's acute or chronic. And so that's kind of very important for us.
Love that. Okay, so you have the model design component. It's a research science component, and you're looking for more ML scientists, research scientists to work with you there. Then you have the large infrastructure that needs to process all the existing data that's coming in, the real time nature of it, the pre and post training components of it, just all the ML infra, and then you have the software that the physicians interact with, or that your partners interact with. So you're looking for engineering across all of those parts of that system.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I could imagine. I mean, you guys are still early. You guys are still small, but given what you shared earlier about the kind of massive size of this problem, I could imagine. Epsilon is pretty big, and I could also imagine the fun that an early engineer can have.
It's a lot of
Building
fun.
the kind of groundwork. Building that kind of 0 to 1, then
Yeah.
being a part of that anticipated growth.
And the beauty is that you have so much traction, and the direction is clear, right? There is no politics, there's no kind of emotion. We know what we need to do every single day. We just need to do more of it and faster.
What types of engineers or like your team members are you attracted to? What sort of maybe like non-technical attributes or like just interpersonal characteristics do you tend to appreciate?
I think I try to make this a fun workspace and when I say that, I mean they're funny. So hopefully we hire people that will laugh at my jokes and will contribute with their own jokes. I think having a culture where you can kind of joke around is very important. I think autonomy is hypercritical. At such an early stage team, you cannot micromanage every engineer and make sure that they're doing a really good job. You need people who kind of understand the macro of what the company's trying to achieve, and the micro of what they need to do today, tomorrow, this week, to be able to get there. And then just raw kind of horsepower and determined, people who are determined. I think you can go to any idea in any early stage company and say, oh, this is not going to work. This is too hard, whatever it may be. That's 90% of people. And then there's the 10% of people that say, hey, I'm going to do whatever I can to make this work. This is a risk worth taking. This is a company worth building. And if a team of 10, 20, 30 people go into solving this problem with that notion, it has a decent chance of being successful. And so people with that mentality of like, hey, I'm not going to give up. I'm not kind of easily swayed. I think that those three things are high priorities in terms of non-technical skills we're looking for.
Love it. Any holiday party plans for the team?
For the team, no, but we should think about that. We should do something. It is pretty cold in San Francisco, though. But yeah, maybe we should throw some sort of party.
Take them to the all-in holiday party. I think it's this weekend.
It's expensive,
Maybe
isn't
there's
it?
still tickets. I
I
don't know.
think it's very expensive.
Maybe like $500 a ticket.
Yeah, we'll see.
It's up
Maybe.
there. It's up there. Yeah. I mean, San Francisco's
Yeah.
an expensive town. What's you're in San Francisco. What's your take on what's happening in San Francisco in AI? Are we early? Is there a bubble? What's going on?
I probably have the more pessimistic view that you'll hear. I think 99% of what's being created these days is not very valuable to the world and does not it might save someone one or two or three clicks, but it does not kind of solve the world's problems. And growing up, I always kind of felt that the notion of Silicon Valley is somewhat dying. And it sounds controversial, but if you think about it, ChatGPT, I think the big labs are creating kind of impactful stuff. I do not think there needs to be 20 AI sales companies or 20 AI marketing companies. And I think what investors don't realize by enabling all of this kind of bubble action is that you're diluting talent among so many different companies, right? I am now having to fight with, some AI sales company because they can offer twice the salary than I can. And that doesn't feel great. And I think Silicon Valley needs to step back and say, why are we funding these companies? A bubble happens when a new technology comes out, but I think it can be guided in some way and more guided towards impact than what's currently being done. So I generally am kind of eager for the bubble to pop. Maybe I will hate myself for saying this now, but it would be nice for things to die down. It would be nice for serious companies to kind of show up and do what they need to do, and not have to fight with so many different players and for talent. So you know hopefully things will slow down soon because we have a big company to build, and it's challenging technical or challenging talent market.
Yeah, amen. Amen to that. There's only so many great engineers that fit the prototype of what it takes to build a successful AI startup, and AI startup founders are unwavering in their requirement for that. And the larger swath of engineering talent kind of doesn't fit that, for better or for worse. They're not kind of quite getting with that as fast as the AI startups are evolving. So something has to give somewhere.
Yeah, something has to give somewhere. Yeah, absolutely.
So what's your big prediction for 2026? What's gonna happen as we look forward?
For Epsilon or for the world?
Both.
I think Epsilon will start to be known for one of the most impactful AI companies out there, within health and outside of health. And I'm pretty confident we can achieve that by end of next year. I think for the world, I do think this stuff is going to slow down, for sure. I think it's just you look at you look at the public markets and you look at the multiples on revenue. It's just how could this kind of keep going up? And all these kind of companies raising capital and they're spending it very quickly, I imagine. And so when they get to their next round and there's a lack of kind of business momentum and progress, we might start seeing a slowdown. So maybe this is a very selfish answer, but it's in the name of impact. So we'll see what happens, but that's my prediction for 2026.
Okay. And you heard it here first. And one of my favorite parts of doing these podcasts and talking about the real time kind of bleeding edge happening is we have it documented and we'll see it. I've had people on the pod who are like talking about a lot of bad stuff that's going to happen. AI is going to replace everybody. And then I have other people that say, it's just like any other technology, and the world will kind of it'll balance itself out with it. And so I definitely feel you with regards to the war for talent. I don't know how it's going to resolve itself, but the world has a nice way of resolving itself. And so I would like to see that happen as well, while both of our businesses continue to be uber successful. How about
Yes.
while that?
Very true. Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, Rustin, thank you again for coming on. Where could people reach you who want to reach you, and what should their first message to you be?
My email is rustin at epsilonlabs.ai. You can find me on LinkedIn or email me. I think, if they want to reach out, they should kind of say why they want to work here and what they want to do. Don't worry too much about resume or things like that. Just kind of focus on, impact at the company and what excites you about it.
I love that. Well, thank you again for coming on. Thank you for building what you're building. I'm sure everyone that's going through the healthcare system and in need of great medical support thanks you, even without knowing that you're doing what you're doing as well. So keep fighting the good fight. We'll get you that talent. I know that we will. And then if you're out there and you're great at what you do and compelled to join, hit Rustin up. Opportune time. So thank you again, Rustin. Excited to have you on.
Thank you, Boris. Appreciate you having me.